Happy New Year! Thank you for all of those who stayed and supported me throughout the entire year. I read every single comment and your support really means a lot. So thank you so much for spending 2023 with me and welcome to 2024. So I hope that my content this year will be interesting and useful to all of you. So once again, thank you and let's dive straight into my 5 favorite reads of 2023. Demian, out of all the books I'm about to mention, is the book that touched and transformed me the most. To be honest, I am still very hesitant to talk about this book. It was quite difficult to put into words intelligently in a way that makes any sort of sense exactly what I felt about this novel. In short, I just think that this book had everything that I usually look for in a novel. The prose was breathtaking. Every sentence was a microcosm of perfection. Every line, every word, every letter, it all served a purpose. It all drove the story along and it was brilliantly written. The purpose being, of course, to paint a psychological portrait of a young boy growing up. Demian is at once an example of the Bildungsroman at its finest and also self-realization and the importance of finding the meaning of life and finding, if not the meaning, then our own purpose. It's a musing on existence, it's a musing on being, and truly it's at once a psychological and a philosophical must-read. It follows a boy called Emile Sinclair who grows up in a conventional good family. He's intent on receiving an education, on living respectfully, on living honestly, on embodying all the values that he has been instilled in from the beginning of his birth. In short, his sole purpose of life is to simply meet the expectations of his family, to meet the expectations of those around him. And he realizes this for the first time when he meets a mysterious classmate who unexpectedly draws him into an entirely different universe, who lifts the veil of his eyes, and what comes before him is an image of a world unlike anything that he has ever known before. Demian is unlike anyone he has ever met before, and he is at once attracted and repulsed. Emil is slowly becoming drawn into a realm of petty crime and misdemeanor and rebellion, and then all at once he's being thrown into a world of self-actualization, into a world of self-discovery. Demian is truly a novel of layers where no reading reveals a complete and total truth. Each page reflects our own open-mindedness. Each page our own interpretation, because it's so dependent on the mood that we are feeling on that one particular day, on the thoughts that we are willing to experience, on the depth that we're willing to go, on the breadth that we're willing to broaden our horizon to. I mean, every novel gives a different reading, and so no single reader will really ever truly experience what feels like a complete picture, like a complete understanding of Hermann Hesse's point. Indeed, I don't think that any two readers will read the same book. The slim novel is therefore, in fact, a myriad of possibilities, a door that opens us to our own thinking, to our own self-reflection. Hesse never really pushes us to a certain conclusion. He never tries to convince us that God is real or to disprove the existence of the entity. He simply presents us the story of Emil, and it's up to us to decide whether Demian is a positive influence or a negative influence, or really what or who is Demian. Every sentence there is something to unpack, and Hermann Hesse's use of symbolism, of imagery, truly it's an unforgettable experience. For anyone looking for a soul-searching classic, Demian is a must-read. It's unsettling, it's unusual. I mean, Demian is at once a shadow self acting as Emile's doppelganger, an alter ego, this idea of Jungian archetypes, and then he's also the devil tempting him towards the temptation, or maybe he's a figment of his imagination. Entering Emile's mind with all its fascinating musings and pondering is a fascinating journey, and it's a true testament to the timelessness of this slim novel, to the true testament to the universality of this classic. It covers ever relevant themes of finding ourselves and fitting into society and the true purpose of being. It's a captivating novel, and it leaves you utterly mesmerized. That is, of course, if you're open to the futility of never ever truly, completely getting it. Roadside Picnic is a novel I already filmed a video on. In fact, quite a few of the novels mentioned in this video I have already mentioned at some point, either on my YouTube channel or on my Instagram page. I mean, what can I say? Great books deserve to be recommended more than once. The video, however, contains spoilers. It's a full summary of the novel and also my interpretations of what I take the novel to be. But this section of the video, like the others, is essentially a spoiler-free review meant to promote the novel and explain why I personally like it. Roadside Picnic is a science fiction novel that revolves around an alien invasion post the actual event. The aliens came and visited Earth and then they left, and behind them they left, well, traces of their visitation. Humanity being humanity, the response was of course varied. Roadside Picnic is a socio-political and then also a psychological examination of humanity's response to the different kinds of situations that arise. It's perhaps in the difference in these responses that the key to seeing the wonder of the novel lies. Of course, some humans end up thinking that the whole alien visitation is a religious affront. I mean, obviously, the people need to be saved. It's a story that we've heard 1,000 times. Of course, the city is doomed. It's a work of the devil. I mean, pretty much the interpretation that people have been going with since the Middle Ages because of the influence of the church. Anything that we don't understand is a mark of the devil. And then, of course, there's the science response. Oh, it's an opportunity. It's something to look forward to poke around, regardless of the consequences that it may bring. And then, of course, there's the money aspect of it all. Black markets operate. People hold tours into these dangerous zones just to make money. And then, of course, there's Red, the protagonist of the novel. The protagonist of the novel is one such person. He's a stalker. Essentially, his job consists of going into the zone and stealing dangerous artifacts to resell them later on. It's a job that you really can't be sure you're ever going to return from, but it's also a job that captivates him with the adrenaline that it brings, and so Red continues to do it. I love this book for the fact that it simply had so much to say about it all, in terms of humans, in terms of our search for happiness, in terms of our pursuit, and in terms of things that actually make sense to pursue and things that we convince ourselves are what we need. It's a very different novel to Demian, which I suppose explores many of the same themes, but it's filled with things that make a story interesting. And I know that people argue that all of the science fiction stuff, it's irrelevant, but I think that this really contributes to making it a great novel. The fact that it's not one particular psychological piece, the fact that it's a total picture. It's a novel that is sure to engage every type of reader, because even if you're not interested in the psychological parts of it, you can be interested in the sci-fi stuff, the aliens, the stuff they leave behind, the visitation, all its various artifacts, the way that people react. I mean, honestly, would it have really been as effective if the brothers simply wrote an essay about what they think the meaning of life should be? No, I don't think so. And the ambiguity of it is really deeply ingrained in the plot and all of its fascinating world building and narrative elements. So I think the fact that the science fiction elements of the novel are so strong is simply a point in its favor. And no, I don't think it could have been replaced by any other thing like dragons or witches. No, I think it's specifically the sciencey aspects of this novel that make it even more special. I mean, honestly, I could talk for years about what I think the meaning of this novel is, and matter of fact, I kind of do for a long time in the video that I mentioned above, but in this short section, I just want to highlight that for anyone interested in our moral compasses and the ways that they can easily become polluted, or in the ways that we can change our minds about things, and in the ways that you think context maybe shapes authors and the way that they write, this is a novel that will prove to absolutely be the novel that you're looking for. It's incredibly immersive. It doesn't have a single storyline, and it poses many more questions than it gives us answers to. So for the curious reader, this is a must read. It starts off a bit difficult and confusing, but over time we really start to understand it, even though there's a lot of information thrown our way. So overall, I think it's simply worthwhile of your time. The Grey House is a completely different type of novel, quite literally in that it's not a slim science fiction, but rather a massive trilogy, and also in its subject contents. That being said, though, it's no less lacking in its merits, and this is a novel which, while recommending, I'm very well aware of the fact that the translation can utterly mess my recommendation up. I have no idea of the merits of the English translation. I've only read it in the original Russian. If the novel ends up lacking in the very departments that I praise, I hope you can forgive me. The Grey House is a novel at its simplest about an orphanage, but it's an orphanage unlike any other. It's an orphanage where the kids are really, truly special. The kids inside, the moment that they enter, they all have those unique nicknames that really portray their specialties. The teachers are as much students of the house, which is less an orphanage and more a sort of entity. And the quirks that I'm talking about range from the downright magical, from having dreams that seem to tell the future, to the ability to manipulate time, to the more usual traits of what they themselves refer to as, well, damaged kids, shaped so by their experiences and their trauma, things like excessive smoking and collecting feathers. I mean, honestly, based on this description alone, I did not expect to fall in love with The Grey House as much as I did. I ended up reading it obsessively over the summer days. It filled my days with the utmost pleasure. Out of all the novels I mentioned in this video, perhaps the only one that can rival this is Vita Nostra, because really, I had so much fun with this novel. It's a strange but utterly inspiring work about how weaknesses are ultimately in the eyes of the observer, because those kids really don't care about their disabilities. They're mentioned in passing. Instead, they use them to leverage them to their strengths. They focus on the advantages that they have rather than the weaknesses that they possess. I mean, it's a brutal work. Death mounts, students kill each other, there are tribes and like gangs within the house, of course, but it's also strangely inspiring in viewing kids being kids. I think that it's one of the most humane novels about disabilities that I've ever read because, well, frankly, their disabilities are simply treated as part of who they are rather than their defining point. They're very real characters that we can really emphasize with because they're vivid and they jump off the page, and really, even if you don't agree with their actions, you find yourself wanting to move on with the story with them. You find yourself becoming as much a part of this house, this orphanage, as they are. It's a society inside a society, and the world outside is completely different to that of the house, and the reader is brought to this astoundingly complex system of a myriad of unspoken roles that we have to figure out, and this communication from kids writing on the walls to pictograms left behind that at first we think are just random bits of information. We slowly begin to piece these bits and pieces of information together, and the reader at the final page of the novel is a completely different reader to the first page because we're now a part of the house. The novel is phantasmagorical. It's very Haruki Murakami. I suppose it's very Helen Oyeyemi as well, but at the same time it's very distinctly its own novel. So it's hard to know the exact type of person that will benefit from a reading. I guess the only answer is just to try. In Russia, The Grey House, which is actually known as The House in Which as the direct translation, has become a somewhat a cult classic. Yes, it's slightly pretentious. Yes, there are certain moments which are absurd. Yes, the novel has its flaws. But it's a wonderful, wonderful work which I think would leave no reader impartial. You either love it or you end up hating it because you don't fully understand it or because you're just not in the right mindset for it. I mean, there were certain moments where I myself felt that, yeah, I'm just not in the right headspace for this kind of work. But I think the key thing is that it leaves no reader apathetic. There's even a bar in Moscow inspired by this book, which I'm planning to visit on my next trip because honestly, yes, the readers that end up loving it are the readers that truly love it till the end. It's a fantastically immersive piece. There's a symphony of brilliant individuals, and the book is like a cake with its layers and depths that we uncover. It's a work that plays with the very concepts of space and time. And even plot, I suppose you could call it postmodern if you wished, with its deconstruction of what we suppose a novel and its structure should be like. The unique style, the storyline, it's exquisite. I mean, it's a true show on Peter San's part. I think the reader that will enjoy it the most is the reader that simply brings themselves to the show and doesn't have this preconceived notion that they're somehow in charge. The reader that simply comes to enjoy the journey without attempting to control it or place their own lenses and experiences and force their own interpretation on the novel. Vita Nostra. I mentioned that I'm not sure about the Grey House translation, but I am sure about the Vita Nostra translation lacking. For that reason, check out my video that is already uploaded. Well, honestly, it is hard to recommend this novel knowing that the translation is not good, because I always feel a little bit hesitant since I know that the book that you're reading is likely not, if you're reading it in English of course, is likely not the book that I have read, but really and truly I understand the difficulties that the translator faced because this is very much a linguistic novel. It's a dark academia, it's a fantasy, and it's also a linguistic novel. Yes, you've heard that right. It's really genre defying, it's genre bending. It's hard to really kind of shove it into one particular category. Of course, it's incomparable to the genius of Demian, or the commentary of Roadside Picnic, or even the complexities of The Grey House, but honestly, it's my guilty pleasure. Frankly, I really enjoyed it because it's a very smart fantasy. It starts off as just any other novel. The heroine, Sasha, or Sashka as I prefer to call her, is on the beach enjoying the seaside with her mom, and then suddenly this strange perverted man comes up to her and he's like, "Oh, by the way, you have some tasks to complete for me." And she's like, "Yeah, no way, who are you?" But then she slowly starts to fear him. You'll understand why as the novel progresses, and he gives her this strange task that she has to swim out into the ocean at 4 a.m. completely naked and then come back. And if she doesn't do it, uh-oh, you don't want to find out the consequences. So she does it, she vomits up some coins, and then she realizes that if she doesn't do it, terrible things happen, like her mom's boyfriend, her mom's summer crush suffering a stroke. So she does this during the summer. She's like, "Oh god, my poor holiday is ruined by the strange man," but finally he's gone. She comes back to the city and finds out that she has to go to this very strange university again, or else. So she goes off to this university in the middle of nowhere, and they're given, well, frankly, insane tasks like translating passages of complete gibberish, and her head hurts from just trying to do it, but they have no other choice because if you don't study, something bad is going to happen to your loved ones. So essentially, the majority of this novel is truly dark academia, unlike any other, in that it's really dark because it's not just study for the pursuit of knowledge and the consequences are your own stupidity and ignorance. No, it's study and suffer for the pursuit of knowledge, or else. And in between that mix, there is also a healthy dose of a very teenage drama. It's a guilty pleasure for exactly that reason. I mean, the majority of this novel will not be interesting to you unless you can relate to it in some way or you care for the attention for detail that the novel has. But then the last 100 pages, something clicks and we truly begin to understand the point of it all. It's beautiful when we finally begin to see the tiny ways in which the novel comes together. All those little things we previously overlooked start to make sense. And that's when the philosophical themes and elements kind of kick in as well, ranging from Wittgenstein's "the limits of my language are the limits of my world" to Plato ideals to comments on materialism and immaterial. It's a novel about the brevity of life, and honestly, Sashka's imperfections, her flaws, her very angsty moments kind of highlight to us that life is short and yet in many ways we wasted. For the language nerds as well, these discoveries towards the end are incredibly gratifying, and it's very difficult to talk about this novel without spoilers because it will ruin the magic of the novel if I tell you just exactly what really attracts me to it. But for anyone, it can be quite a fun read, especially if you're in the mood for something that's relatively light throughout. It's a rather quick-paced novel that's sure to get you out of a reading slump. And yeah, honestly, on this list it's just my guilty pleasure because I really had a lot of fun reading this novel back in 2023. Feels a bit insane to say that, 2023. I can't believe it's 2024 already. The Age of Innocence. So the final book in this video is actually a really recent video. Like, I only filmed this a couple weeks ago, so I will keep this relatively brief. Edith Wharton is frankly brilliant. I've already started to lose touch of how many times I've said brilliant, but honestly it just describes Edith Wharton perfectly. She paints this incredible flamboyant picture of the golden age and high New York society with all its glamour but also its problems and a myriad of challenges. It revolves around Newland Archer, who's set to marry the beautiful, gorgeous May Welland, the perfect nice girl, the conventional girl, the kind of girl who knows exactly what she wants, a quiet family life. And then suddenly he meets a woman who completely turns over his world. She's been utterly, lower your voice, Europeanized. Essentially, she doesn't pay any sort of attention to social conventions and the things that people want from her. She couldn't care less about the feelings of others. She acts the way that she wants to act and not the way that society wants her to act. Archer is of course scandalized, not only because this ungodly creature is somehow May's cousin, but because from their very first meeting she shocks him. Oh my gosh, she has a bare shoulder exposed, how scandalous in New York society. But then slowly when he begins to interact with her, when he begins to communicate with her, he realizes that there's more to her than meets the eye, and he finds his views transforming too. Suddenly he comes to the very controversial thought that, maybe women should have, I don't know, rights? Even for its time, it was a progressive novel, but for Newland Archer to have these thoughts, it would have been, well, frankly insane. Countess Ellen Olenska, this woman, is very much the black sheep of the family, and under her influence, Archer finds himself becoming increasingly more alienated, increasingly more estranged from the New York society that he has grown up knowing. This is a novel which enchants. It has so much allure in its presentation of the golden age and high society. But it also cuts to the point with its very poignant critique of high society with all its myriad of flaws. It's a novel ahead of its time, and its commentary on society and life and expectations is remarkable. The character portraits are so well written. The characters are at once the makers of the comedy and serve as the sharpest critics of their own society. We become endlessly entertained by their dialogues, and the ultimate message of the book is at once bitter and inspiring. Like the rest of the novels in this video, I hope you decide to pick it up. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I will see you soon.